What's up guys, it's Amanda and welcome back to my channel. Happy Artsy Fartsy Friday. Today I'm going to be reviewing the Winsor & Newton alcohol-based markers. These have been out for a while, so they're not new. They were not sent to me. I purchased these with my own money and I purchased them from Blick.com, and I will have links to where you can purchase these down below. The links are affiliate links, which means if you purchase through those links it goes to supporting my channel, but you can find out more information about that in the description box. So I have heard a lot about these markers. People have asked me to review them, they recommended them to me, and I'd put off buying them for a while just because of the expense. But I had a birthday recently over the summer and I asked for these for my birthday, and basically I got birthday money and purchased them with my birthday money. So that was kind of how these came to be in my possession. Now Winsor & Newton has two different types of alcohol-based markers. They have their Pro Marker series, which has a bullet nib and a chisel nib, and then they have their Brush Marker series, which has a brush nib and a chisel nib, very much like the Copic sketch versus the Copic original kind of setup here. So you can kind of think about that comparison. And I purchased both because I wanted to try both and I just wanted to have a good color range. Something to note is that I believe the Pro markers are a little bit cheaper than the brush markers. Typically you do pay more for the brush nib itself. And when looking on the site, I realized I could get a really nice set of neutrals in the brush marker form and then just get a really nice basic set in the Pro marker form, which would give me a little bit of flexibility, plus I would get to try out both marker types. So I purchased this 12 set, and it's 12 plus 1 because it does include a colorless blender, so 13 markers total. And this is marked as set number 2. If that means anything to anyone, there's obviously some information about the markers on here. And then I purchased the Skin Tone Set 1, which includes 6 markers. And I've already swatched them out, and I'm going to be kind of talking about how I review markers. If you've watched these videos on my channel before, then you kind of know the deal. And we're going to be comparing these markers to Copic's just briefly in kind of size and shape. So let's go ahead and open one of these bad boys up to show you what they look like. I'm just gonna pull out any color from here. So the barrel shape kind of reminds me a little bit more of Prismacolor, although Prismacolor doesn't have this pointed tip at the end. That does make it really easy to distinguish which end is the brush tip and which end is the chisel tip, because the brush tip is the side with the tapered end. You can kind of think of this as, you know, mimicking the shape of the brush tip. And it does look pretty similar to Copic's brush tip when we take a look at it. I think it may be a little bit shorter in size, but flexibility wise, I think they're pretty similar. Copic's might be a little bit more flexible, but that also could just be that I've had my Copic's for longer, so the nibs are a little bit more broken in. So that is something to note as well. They're about the same length, although this marker is completely round. This one is more oval, so they feel a little bit different in the hand. This one kind of, you know, you can turn it to fit more comfortably depending on whether that's horizontally or vertically. This is going to be kind of the same shape all the way around. So very nitpicky stuff, but I do like to just mention those things for those of you who maybe have arthritis and you have, you know, difficulty getting comfortable holding markers, or if you're holding a marker for a long time, that may be an issue for you. So it is something to consider. But I will also go ahead and show you the chisel tip, and the chisel tip does look very similar to Copic's chisel tip, so we can just go ahead and take a little look at that too. It actually does appear to be quite a bit wider, but it performs very much the same way. It's a little bit thicker as well. So just some little details to note about the differences. But these markers have been spoken about very highly just in regards to how they compare to Copic's. People say they actually prefer the ink quality in the Winsor & Newton markers. They don't really have that grainy appearance according to some people, so I thought that was a really interesting claim, and it definitely put these markers on the radar for me. I also want to go ahead and show you the Pro markers in comparison to the brush markers, just so you can get a feel for the differences. Now, first of all, you can see that the barrels are exactly the same. So unlike Copic marker that kind of has a different barrel for every marker type, these have the same barrel, but you can see the packaging is just slightly different. One says Pro marker, one says brush marker. It does still have that tapered end, only this time the tapered end is indicative of the bullet tip, and the bullet tip is not not something that I would think of as a typical bullet tip. It's a little bit wider and it comes out to a little bit of a smaller taper. But just to kind of show you the comparison to the Copic original, this is my Copic original marker, and you can see it's got a little, well, they're pretty similar, but the Copic original doesn't come to as fine of a point, and it's a little bit longer. But it is very, very stiff for both markers. This is what you are getting with the Pro markers. Why you would want a Pro marker versus a brush marker is going to be completely up to you. If you want to save a little bit of money, you can definitely opt for the Pro markers. You can do a lot with just a bullet nib and a chisel nib, but you can do a heck of a lot more with a brush nib. So it really just depends on your art style. If you're wanting to do a lot of heavy blending and get really smooth transitions, the brush nib is going to be the way to go. If you are doing a more kind of, I guess, cell shading style where you're having more harsh shadows and the color transition doesn't really have to be super clean, the bullet nib is going to be just fine for you, and it in many ways can serve you pretty well. So yeah, that's just kind of a look at the comparison between the brush marker and the Pro marker. Let's take a look at the swatches just from the two sets that I have, so you can kind of see the colors that I was working with and how I decided to test them out in my illustration. Okay, so the first thing that we are going to look at are the swatches of the 12 set or 13 color set, but obviously I didn't swatch the colorless blender, so I just swatched the 12 basic colors that came in the Pro marker set. And initially when I look at these colors, they seem pretty light. There's not a whole lot of depth. You get a couple of really light shades like these Y417 and G339. Those are a little bit lighter, and then you have some more mid-tones like this, you know, darker kind of emerald green, C247. This R576 is really pretty as well. And you can see there's not really very many neutral shades. They do give you one brown, which I suppose is thoughtful. But it does feel kind of out of place in this set just due to the fact that there are no other neutral colors to really pair it with. You could potentially pair it with the yellows and the oranges, but there's still quite a drastic shift between those two colors, so a transition might be a little bit tricky. I do appreciate that for the rest of the colors in this set, each color does appear to have a buddy, in the sense that there is another marker within this color range that you could pair it with. So for example, I can blend these two yellows together. I can blend this yellow and this orange, or this orange and this red can blend nicely with this pink, which blends nicely with the purple. The purple can blend with really either of the blues blend nicely with each other, and these two greens blend nicely as well. And then this green, because it's a little bit on the blue side, I think it could probably work with either the blue or the green as well. So that is something to look at for a basic set, because you may have 12 colors, but if these 12 colors don't work well together, then it's not really like having 12 colors, because it is very, very limiting. So that is always something that I look at and recommend in a basic set, is that you have colors that have a buddy, at least one other marker within that set that you can work with it. So I really like this. I think it's a good basic set. I do think it's lacking a little bit of depth, and as for me personally, I always prefer neutrals, but knowing Winsor and Newton, they do have several of these sets, so you will likely find things like darker colors and neutral colors in other sets, just not the 12 set number 2 in particular. Moving on to the skin tone set, I'm just going to go ahead and move this down so we can take a look. You can see we do get a little bit more of a range of depth in this set. We do have some lighter colors like this 0819. I'm not sure if that's a 0 or an O. It might be an O. Yeah, it looks like the letter O. So O for orange. I'm not really sure. The color system here has evaded me a little bit. I'm not totally sure what it means, but I do always recommend swatching out your markers so that you can get a feel for the colors that you have. And if you can find a nice color chart that explains the coding system to you, then great. If I find one, I will have it linked down below for you guys to use. But typically I just kind of like to swatch markers out myself, and if I can't immediately understand the coding system, then I don't really worry about it, and I just use this as my reference to refer back to when picking colors. So like I mentioned, this first color here, pretty light and nice. This next one a little bit darker. This one a little bit, probably about the same depth as the first color, but it's a little bit warmer, pinker, peachier. Then we have kind of this, it's not quite like a mustard yellow, but it's like a darker beige. And I wouldn't typically think of that color as a skin tone color. It's a little bit, it almost pulls a little bit green for me, like not like even beyond olive, which is, you know, kind of an undertone for some skin tones. This is almost a little bit on the green side. So that color is interesting, and I did end up using it in the piece, but it is just a little bit of an interesting choice in my opinion for a skin tone set. Then we have another really warm brown, and one thing you'll notice is that this is strikingly similar to the brown that is in the 12 marker set. These are almost indistinguishable from one another, so if I could go back and do it again, I perhaps would have either picked a different 12 color set or just bought some brush markers individually to avoid getting basically a duplicate color. And then we have one slightly darker brown, and it's not so much darker as it is cooler than this other brown. These are both kind of the same depth. This one is just a little bit more on the cool side, whereas that second to last one was a little bit on the warmer, redder orange side. So I don't know how I feel about these as a skin tone set. Obviously it is hard to fit, you know, the endless number of skin tones that people have into just 6 markers, but I do feel like they catered pretty well to the paler skin tone range here, and then with the darker skin tone range, I kind of felt like these could have been a little bit different and perhaps a little bit more effective within the set if they had been just slightly different colors. You guys can let me know your thoughts on that. I know, you know, conversations about skin tone markers can get a little heated, but it really does not have to be that serious. Basically what I got this set for was just to have a good amount of neutrals to pair with this set, and if that is what you are looking for, then I think that's what it is. If you slap the label of skin tone set on it, I'm gonna be a little bit more critical, because I am looking for colors that are reflective of skin tones in my opinion, and in my opinion this falls a little bit short. The lighter colors, even for me, are a little bit like too kind of ashy looking, so I don't know, I just feel like there was a little bit lacking here as far as skin tones go, but as just a set of neutrals I think it's fine, and I did end up using them more as just neutrals than I did really as anything else. So yeah, let's get into kind of the comparisons here. One of the tests that I always do when I'm reviewing markers is a layering test. And for this review in particular, I was reviewing the Pro Marker and the brush marker separately, just to really compare them not only to one another, but just compare them to other marker brands that I've tried in general. So this color right here is from the Pro Marker set. I think I could get maybe a solid 2 or 3 different colors distinctly just from layering. The first layer and the second layer are pretty similar, and then the third and fourth layer are pretty similar, but you can see by the time I layered on that 5th layer it was getting a little bit darker, and I can definitely see the difference between the 5th layer and the first layer. So I do think they layer pretty well. Not the best at layering that I've seen or tried, but one thing that I have noticed in just reviewing more markers is that this can vary even just color to color. I typically try and choose like a nice mid-tone, and I typically choose a green for some reason. I'm not really sure why, but it could depend on the color that you pick for this test, so it is something that you are just going to kind of have to get acquainted with when you purchase your markers. Then on to the skin tone set. Obviously I didn't have a green marker to test out, so I just kind of picked out the most obvious mid-tone from the set and I tried that. This, you can see there is still kind of 5 distinct color differences, but I would say that 1 and 2 are fairly similar again, 3 and 4 are very similar again, and then 5 is pretty drastically different from the first. So I would say, again, you can get maybe 2 or 3 distinct layers of color when you do this, and I would definitely not go beyond 5 layers. You're just gonna be oversaturating your paper. The next test that I did was testing out the chisel tip and the bullet tip, and then the chisel tip and the brush tip. Obviously the chisel tip for both markers are the same, so they kind of perform the same, but I did test them both times just for I don't know, consistency, I suppose. And then so you can see the first 3 lines here are all with the chisel tip. So this is the broadest stroke I could get with the chisel tip, kind of the chisel tip flat on its side, and then the thinnest line that I could get with the chisel tip just using the very edge. And then the 2 lines below that, there's the 1 solid line with the bullet tip that I could get. You know, you do still get a fair amount of tapering with that, so you do have a little bit of control like you would with the brush tip, but just not as much. And then I did kind of test my squiggles and my fine strokes just to see how thin the line could go, how thick the light could go, and just the kind of variation that you get. So that is what you're seeing here. I know it's not super descriptive, but just hopefully by looking at this you can get a feel for all the different varieties of strokes and lines that you get with the Pro Marker. And then with the brush marker, kind of the same thing. The first 3 lines with the chisel tip, so you can see you actually do get a lot of variety with the chisel tip. I think chisel tips are a little underrated in that sense, and I do really like when my markers have a chisel tip, which is going to be an important point to remember in future marker reviews. And then for the brush tip, it performs very much the same way as Copics do. I was very comfortable and familiar with the way that the brush tip performed. It's a nice taper. You can see you get a lot of like nice solid opaque color and a nice thick line. And then as you kind of drag it out and taper it, not only does the ink kind of lighten, but the line kind of tapers as well, which is really nice. It's a nice touch for the brush tips to have. And then again, kind of doing this squiggle test of, you know, how broad does the brush tip go, how fine does the brush tip go, and kind of what control do you have with it. And I do find that I have a lot of control with the brush tip, just like I do with Copics, although I wouldn't say I have, you know, significantly less control with the bullet tip. I just think that the brush tip is a little bit easier and you can get things done a little bit more quickly. The brush tip basically just allows you to do everything at once, whereas if you're using a marker that has a bullet tip, you may be switching back and forth between the chisel tip a little bit more, whereas the brush marker, you wouldn't really need to do that. You could rely solely on the brush tip and be totally fine. Hopefully this is all making sense and you guys are keeping up with me, but just to kind of demonstrate a little bit of blending here, I was trying out some things with both the sets. So again, Pro markers over here, brush markers over here. I did find that these markers blended pretty easily, and I was able to do a lot of the same things with these markers as I do with my Copics, and I was especially impressed with the way that the brush markers blended. I blended every color from the skin tone set in this gradient here, and then I just tried out a couple of blends over here because it's hard to tell how easy the bullet tips are going to be in blending. And like I said, I think every marker in this set kind of came with a buddy, at least 1 or 2 other markers that could work within this set, so that's kind of what I was demonstrating here. So you can see the pink and the purple blended really effortlessly. The 2 blues blended pretty well also, although I think I kind of oversaturated the paper a little quickly, which is why it's kind of bulging and bleeding out a little bit here. And then you can see the gradient between the yellow, orange, and red, really nice as well. So that just kind of, like, I don't need to explain it too much, that just kind of proves itself right there. But the final test that I do is always seeing what happens when I layer a lighter color over a darker color, and then I also test how the marker reacts to rubbing alcohol or a colorless blender. So for the Pro markers over here, and basically I have every reason to believe that there's the same ink in both of these markers, so doing the test like this for both markers was really redundant and not necessary, but I decided to do it anyway, just for the sake of the video. So for the Pro markers, you can see when you layer a lighter color over a darker color, that lighter color kind of lifts the darker color and you can get some really cool effects with this. It was very easy to do with these markers. I didn't have to go over it multiple times. It seemed to happen pretty quickly and naturally, and you can see kind of how it behaves with the colorless blender thrown on top. It just, you know, pushes the color out pretty nicely. It doesn't really lighten the color in the middle though, which is what I'm typically used to with Copic, so that is something to be aware of. I don't feel like it penetrates the paper enough to really lighten the base color, but you can see it does kind of make it spread a little bit. So yeah, just kind of for the sake of the review, I wanted to do this test because I do it with every marker brand, so I'm going to go through this last part a little quickly so we can get into the demo. I did that again on this side. I layered a lighter color over the darker color, and then I layered the colored blender over the darker color, and you can see I got some pretty similar effects. With this one, I was using the brush nib, so it was a little bit harder to control. The dots aren't as fine, but that's because I was stippling with the brush tip and, you know, trying to do it pretty quickly. So that's the result that I got. And you can see again with the colorless blender layered on top, it didn't really lighten the base color. And this is with a drop, by the way. So I drop it on the paper and let it do its thing and then kind of observe the results. So this isn't a concentrated form. This is a little bit more of like free form, let the thing do what it's gonna do kind of thing. I feel like I'm rambling now and I'm not making sense, but that's basically the results of the tests that I conducted on the Winsor & Newton Pro and brush markers. Hopefully this kind of preps you for seeing the markers in action, because that is what we are going to get into next. So for the remainder of this video, I'm just going to be breaking down my final thoughts about the markers, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about price and where you can purchase them. But first, let me just tell you what I am illustrating. I am drawing my original character, Volana. She is sort of a goddess character based on the moon, and it's sort of going with this whole story that I'm developing that I will tell you guys a lot more about in the future when I'm, you know, sort of getting into the nitty-gritty of actually developing this story and these characters. But many of you know who Volana is at this point. Many of you have done fan art of her, which is amazing. I love when you guys do that. If you want to post fan art and you want to share it, there is a way to do that in the description bar down below where you can use a hashtag so I get to see it. But let me talk about these Winsor & Newton markers. Now, I just verified some price information for you guys, so I have the most up-to-date knowledge. If you are watching this video a year from now, it may be out of date, so don't sue me or sound off in the comments. I'm trying my best. So you can purchase these markers from various different retailers such as dickblick.com, Amazon, Hobby Lobby, and Michaels. Although it's pretty hard to beat Amazon Prime 2-day free shipping, if you're willing to suck it up and purchase these items on Blick, you usually are getting a good deal, and if you purchase over a certain amount, you can usually qualify for free shipping, although it is standard shipping, not express shipping, so bear that in mind. If you are like an instant gratification person, Blick usually takes a little bit longer to ship. You can also purchase them in store at places like Hobby Lobby and Michaels. I'm not sure what the individual open stock selection in those stores is like. It may depend on your location, and usually you can use 40% off coupons at both of those places, so you can maybe snag a better deal on a set there. But I was surprised to find out that the price for a single individual marker is the same whether or not you're purchasing the Pro or the brush marker. Individual markers sell for $3.59 a piece no matter which kind you're buying. So if you purchase a brush marker, it's $3.59. If you purchase a Pro marker, it's $3.59, which I think is actually really cool, and it's a very reasonable price per marker, especially considering the price of Copics. One downside, of course, is that Winsor & Newton markers are not refillable, so if a marker runs out of ink, you are having to go to the store and repurchase that same marker over again. If you are an environmentally conscious person, this may be a downside for you and may kind of cross Winsor & Newton off your list altogether. As far as I know, they aren't making any plans to add refills to their line anytime soon. Another important thing is that if you purchase in sets, you are getting a better value. The value does differ based on the type of marker though. So unlike the open stock where the price is the same for both markers, if you purchase in the set for the Pro markers, such as the set that I reviewed in this video, if you purchase the set of 13 markers for $26.52, that brings the price per marker down to $2.04 each. What a bargain. That's actually a pretty good deal per marker, so I would highly recommend doing that, and I'm sure the bigger the set, the better the deal, so keep that in mind as well. With the brush marker set that I reviewed, the 6 marker skin tone set retails for $20.13 on Blick, bringing the individual price per marker down to about $3.35 a marker. So it's not as good of a deal, but it's still a little bit cheaper than that open stock price. So if you can do it, I would definitely recommend starting to buy in sets and then transferring to open stock once you sort of build up your collection. Overall, I was pretty impressed with these markers. I really like the way this illustration came out. I feel like I incorporated a lot of the colors. They layered nicely, they blended really well. I was a little worried about the use of the bullet nib, especially in the background, because it was such a large area and I was having to switch back and forth between the bullet nib and the chisel nib, which gave the ink on the paper enough time to dry and potentially create streaks. But while creating this sunset background, I actually think the streaks add a little bit of character and they look really nice. The only downside that I have about this illustration is that I really didn't have a color dark enough to fill in this area on her chest, which is supposed to kind of look like a hole in her chest, but I really didn't have any colors dark enough to do that. So it looks a little awkward, it looks a little funny. Please don't judge me too hard for that. But if you like this illustration, you can purchase a print of it on my store Envy. My store Envy from now on is only going to sell originals and original based artwork, so you can still get original artworks or prints of original artwork, but there will no longer be any fan art on there. I'm planning to do a video talking all about that very soon. So if you have thoughts on selling fan art, leave them in the comments down below, because I may use them in that video as part of that discussion. But that is it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching the Winsor & Newton review. Thank you for bearing through this really long video. I hope you guys have a wonderful weekend, and I will see you on the internet. Bye guys!